Hello, everybody. Jonathan Kirschner here, founder and CEO of AIIR Consulting. And today we're going to talk about leadership on a podcast about leadership. And so our topic today is awesome. It's going to be covering a very specific and very important industry, life sciences, pharmaceutical, biotech, that whole space and ecosystem. And we have the privilege of having Ian Wilcox, who is an advisory board member at AIIR, a private equity investor, does a million other things, one of which is serving as a subject matter expert in many different contexts in the pharmaceutical space. So, Ian, it's fantastic to have you on this call. And
it's great to be here.
Wonderful to have Megan Marshall, our managing partner at AIIR Consulting as well. I am curious because you're managing partner, so you're doing a gazillion things. And again, as I mentioned, like you're in pharma, but every sector.
Right.
But you're also an executive coach, and you've coached in just about every sector as well. Curious if you've distinguished anything distinctive when you're working with pharma leaders versus in entertainment media or nonprofit. Tech.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we actually, in our work with all of our clients and thinking about pharma, we actually track what are the leadership skills that they focus on compared with other industries. They are just the most brilliant in their field, and they're stepping into how do they need to work with others? How do they need to collaborate with others? How do they need to not just think about, I think we'll talk on this, not just their functional area, but how do they work cross-functionally? And so when studying the specific leadership skills that our leaders that we support in pharma work on, the number one skill, and this is different from what we see in other industries, is this idea of influence.
Yeah.
How do leaders influence in order to get work done, in order to lead effectively? And right behind that, and I think this one's pretty interesting, is self-awareness. So at AIIR, we talk about kind of these three core leadership domains of leading self, leading others, and leading the organization. And so really interesting to see that influence is really about how do you lead others, how do you drive and bring about change. But in order to do that, in some ways, you need to know more about yourself as a leader. And I think for leaders that are incredibly technical in their field, the thing I love about what we do at AIIR and Executive Coaching is we're giving leaders an opportunity to slow down just a bit and reflect. Who are they? What do they know about themselves? How do they work with others? How do they influence? And just think it provides a tremendous opportunity for them to think about their leadership and how do they change to be more effective. And I love the work that we get to do with pharma leaders.
Well, those two things, sort of slowing down and cultivating deep self-awareness and the ability to influence interpersonally. Unfortunately, medical school doesn't teach you that, right?
That's the point.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going from day one and you're doing these insane, shifts and your residency and your fellowship. And then, maybe you're working and doing some high stakes, craft, whether you're a surgeon or this, and then you're working in pharma, and all of a sudden you're this subject matter expert. And why do I need to
your subject matter experts and think about the functions
where
there are deep subject matter experts, manufacturing, early stage development, which are largely PhDs, then development, which is getting in humans, and that tends to be the MD side of the business. So you get individuals who come essentially from their own disciplines, intellectual subject matter discipline, and then we put them all together. And then we say, develop this product, right? It's, in a sense, almost like speaking different languages.
Right.
And some of the intellectual competition, there's a lot about the need to be right, because these are really smart folks. So their currency professionally has been about proving that they are right. And that gets back to what we found in our white paper, that behavior of proving that you were right, being the expert, is not necessarily, in most cases, is not the behaviors that one is needed for leadership cross-functionally, right? And how does one set aside that predilection, that need to be omniscient, all-knowing, right? And moving from a functional leadership, it's kind of like in academia, all the way to the top to be the dean, right, in the academic model. And so many of those folks were developed and curated in that model, but we put them in a large organization. You pick the size and name of the organization, and then we expect that they're going to work cross-functionally. We expect that that language that they're going to adopt will include an enterprise mindset. Well, it's very hard for those of us who have been master's, PhD, to unlearn behavior. We know that. We know that to be true on a lot of levels. And part of the unlearning that we found in our own coaching and our own work is this notion of actually relinquishing that need to be right, relinquishing that kind of sense of I'm here as the SME, the subject matter expert. You might be, but actually when you're leading cross-functionally or at the C-suite level, the mindset that we need from you is, as a leader, is actually to relinquish and pull back from always your dominant knowledge of subject matter expertise.
Yeah. And I think that can be a very humbling experience if you have all of this expertise and then all of a sudden to realize that you need to build new skills and new ways of working in order to lead differently in a cross-functional role. And I know I have a question too for Ian and Jonathan, but I'm curious kind of in your experience when you think about leaders who have then succeeded in terms of thinking about that, leaders of cross-functional environments, what makes them, successful versus those that aren't really able to make that pivot and figure out a new way of working, that maybe do not want to kind of have that humbling experience of having to face themselves in a mirror that they may not know everything about how to do something and about how to really drive change in the organization.
So I found in my work that at some point there is a switch that goes off and you need to make a choice. And if your identity was defined by being an MD or your identity was being defined by this subject matter expert, if you don't make that shift to being enterprise and thinking and using a different mindset or adopting a different mindset and language, you fundamentally just don't make it, right? And there's a couple of indicators. What do you choose to talk about? What do you choose to focus? Some of that shifts when we all of a sudden load you up with big stock options and stuff, and you hopefully those incentives, as extrinsic incentives, begin to correlate to a shift in mindset, and that can occur, not always, but it usually does. So by the time you've made those shifts and moves, there are some people who fundamentally don't want to leave the science. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we were talking about this early-stage career person, phenomenal in his area of therodiagnostics and radioimaging. And I said to him, what do you love about what you do? And he said, I love testing and seeing when I get and put a radioactive isotope and see what it does as it goes through the body and knowing kind of diagnostically. And you could see in the moment as we were talking about how just all that lit up for him. And I said, what if I told you I wanted you to spend 40 to 50% of your time doing budgets or doing presentations for private equity? How would you feel about that? And you could see in the moment the energy just drop from his face. And I just kind of reflected. I said, do you notice how your energy level had changed when I described what would be required of you 5 years, 10 years from now if you were at said level? And he noted it. And I didn't want to say that I wanted him to come to the conclusion, at least at right now, he wants to stay in that SME subject matter expert lane. And that's okay.
That's okay.
Goodness gracious, we need somebody to come up with a cure for you pick the cancer. Right? We need those individuals. So, and I don't see it as an either or. I mean, there's plenty of pharma organizations that have created really good career paths, very prestigious career paths for these kinds of individual contributors. And we need that.
Yeah.
We really do need that. Because it's not in the sense that therefore because you are senior vice president, executive vice president, that somehow is better than being the person who has figured out how to address a really awful thing like GBM, which is brain cancer, right? And I think this is an industry that's recognizing subject matter experts can be leaders in their own right.
Absolutely.
We just need to figure out a way to make them articulate that and to be valued. Because I think intuitively there's so much emphasis on the leader as a positional construct, right? As CEO, whatever. And I think part of what comes out in our research is to say, your intellectual leadership is huge.
It's huge.
Yeah, and it has a significant impact.
Right. And we always talk about what got you to where you are now is not what necessarily is going to make you successful at that next role when you're thinking about moving from a place of, let's say technical expertise to thinking about being a leader.
Right.
And something I see sometimes, we do a lot of work at AIIR with supporting leaders in transition. And sometimes what I see is that there's this assumption like I've got that milestone, I have that promotion, I'm going to now make it at this next role. And when they find out, oh, this is hard, or I'm going to need to change in order to drive success in a different way than I did before, there's this sense of like, I want to go back. I want to be the functional leader. And I'm always curious. Sometimes I think that's the best option. We do exactly what you said. We need those functional leaders. Sometimes I think that people should almost stick with it a bit more. And they might want to run back to where they feel most competent. And so almost how much do you really work with leaders and take that time to slow down in order to speed up to see if they really do want to move into that kind of cross-functional leadership, people management role, or do they want to stay in their functional area of expertise?
I was thinking about various books and I've read as well as talking to people end of career in this industry. And those that were PhD, bench scientist types, or CMOs, chief medical officers, who stayed in their lane, functional lanes. And then I compared some of those, again, this is anecdotal, to those that become C-suite CEOs. I would say there's a large majority of my client base over 25 years that still connect to the identity that they had as MD. And it's not an either or, but it somehow shaped them. And what's interesting is when they talk about the great achievements that they had as CEOs and whatnot, but there's that sense that they never really left home. And it was interesting. One client story I'll leave with you. This person was running a large country in Europe as the GM. And so one client I can tell you that when I spoke to him 2 years ago, after he left that job because of an M&A, and he moved out of the role of running this large country in Europe to going back to seeing patients.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Listen, I mean, that makes sense that you want to become an MD because you want to heal, right?
Exactly.
And so that purposefulness is a thread.
That's what he alluded to. He wanted to go back to the thing that really moved him was going back to teaching and seeing patients.
That's beautiful. I do want to, Ian, you mentioned our white paper. So I do want to just update everybody that we have an amazing new white paper called Leadership's Critical Role in Functional Pharmaceutical Teams. And this just was released. And Ian, you mentioned 25 years doing work in this space. You've worked with everybody, J&J, GSK, Eli Lilly, Merck, Pfizer, former Allergan, like everybody.
Right.
Shire, former. Takeda, everybody. So I kind of have a lot of curiosity around, I'm sure there's certain dynamics and themes that are sort of, they exist stably and consistently and will always exist. Like this notion of growing up and going through the medical school system and maybe going through academia or doing some practitioner work as an MD and being an expert, and then needing to grow beyond that, right? And relinquishing some of that and being open to learning new things and not always being the sole expert. That seems like a timeless challenge, right?
It is.
Curious, though, is there anything you're seeing right now, given the confluence of how pharma and the industry has evolved? I mean, many of these organizations over the past 25 years have 10x'd in size, right? And with greater size comes more complexity. And I'm curious, what's changed and what are the implications to leadership? Like, are there new demands on leadership, and then I do want to segue a little bit into the white paper and what we talk about there.
There's a couple things that have changed, or more than a couple, but here's what comes to mind. Depending on where we're talking in the organization, and when I say where, we're in the value chain. So if we're talking about early stage development, there's no question there are companies that are currently out there that are helping using AI tools to accelerate how early stage research is done. So there is some disintermediation that's occurring in technology, and obviously, AI is tossed out there all the time. But there's no question in terms of early stage development, which is before we get to what we call proof of concept, before we know that there's something there that works, right? Mm-hmm. I think the role that AI is playing and how that is impacting bench science is significant, and I'm hearing a lot from clients about that. When we move from the science into humans, that's clinical development, that's running of trials. Trial development and running of trials is expensive, very expensive. You got to recruit patients based on a certain size so you can get a statistical effect, so on and so forth. I think depending on the drug class and the therapeutic area, increasingly trial recruitment is becoming more and more challenging for a lot of different reasons. I think post-COVID, obviously you can imagine the amount of challenges you were having during COVID to getting, depending on the trial you're doing, you've got to do blood draws, you've got to do any number of things to monitor these patients, right? I think there's some ongoing challenges with trial recruitment. There's so many clinical trials going on, and there's just an ongoing need in the industry to do trials and to do them well. And to do them at scale that gives you a powered study and statistically meaningful study. And in that sense, one of the things that I'm seeing is the greater, what I call an ecosystem of partnership. That is, we've always been an industry that's had to partner, but we're having to learn how to partner more effectively, right? And we're bringing, I grew out in the auto industry where, car is 80, 90% components that are developed by somebody else. This industry is beginning to evolve with that mentality, right? That it doesn't need to be built all by us, and it can't, for financial reasons, other reasons. And that mindset is one that, growing up in the auto industry, was there 25, 30 years ago. Now more than ever, our cars are basically modular, and they're, you think about the degree to which basically the chassis is the chassis. This industry in various ways is starting to evolve to that. And then that requires a very different mindset around partnering. That is something that I'm noticing. And it isn't just I'm going to go acquire and buy something, but now I'm learning there's platforms out there. There's multiple platforms. There's something called ADCs, which are part of antidrug conjugates. That's part of a platform that's used in the space of oncology. Where you're seeing companies partner around getting a platform. Or they buy them, but in some cases they partner. So this partnering mentality is changing the notion of how we do research, and in part how we partner with those to do clinical development. Then we go farther down into the commercial model, and wow, is that changing? How many doctors that you and I know now want to see a sales rep? Wow, right? I mean, think about all right, let's be honest, right? Reach and frequency, that's something that we all knew, and I worked in the context of, number of calls and all of that, and the correlation between the number of calls that Dr. Jonathan would somehow equate to higher scribing. That model's dead. I mean, there are those that would say that that's not true, but by and large, Jonathan can get that, and Dr. Jonathan can get information any number of ways. It's not that the call, depending on the nature and drug class, isn't meaningful. There may be places, particularly in product launch and new indications, that might be. But one of the areas is that entire commercial model, where at one point Pfizer had something like in the early aughts, 40, 50,000 reps. Something like that, as I recall. I'll have to go back and somebody can verify my numbers on that, but it was a phenomenal amount of reps. So that in commercial model, and the role that technology, the role of access of information. So what's the value out of the sales call? Is changing what the commercial model is looking and evolving to be. And you're seeing tension in the industry that says, yeah, I still need that, but there's also a recognition that actually there are different ways to go to market, digital, for example. And that's a whole new skill set for this industry.
Wow. You know, I do want to get to like what, in many ways, I see you as like the pharma C-suite whisperer.
Oh,
you know, I mean, you spent a lot of time in that rarefied
Thank you.
space. So I'm curious to understand more about like what is the pharma leader, what's on their mind, and what are they struggling with, where are they challenged right now. And I'm also curious about like what inspired this? What inspired this white paper on cross-functional leadership? And you know, has that always been important, or is it
more important
becoming
now?
more and more important? So yeah,
let me take the question: what's on their mind first? I think in this environment, 50%, something like 50% of all biotechs in the United States and globally are trading below cash. So in the environment that we're sitting in right now, we have not seen anything like this probably since 2007, 2008. Let's parse out the big pharma, the big pharmas, the Pfizer's, Merck's, GSK's of the world. But that mid-cap and below, many of them are trading at or below cash. So depending on where you sit, right? If you're Pfizer, you're not there, but even the large caps are under pressure. And let me tell you what the pressure is. If you and I believe that we've done the NPV and we're going to introduce a new drug for, let's say, AMD, which is acute macular degeneration, something that a lot of folks as they're elderly get in their eyes, right? It's you know, an ocular issue. Let's say we believe that drug, when we've done the analysis and we know what the other competitors are doing, that we can introduce that drug, launch it, and let's say we believe we're going to get $1,000 per treatment. That's the analysis that we did, but then let's think about the environment, what we know is going on right now around pharma pricing and pharma pricing. So all our models and our profit model and our launch and all the development that's gone into that drug, we really solidly believe we can get $1,000 for that. But what happens once we launch it, and all of a sudden the major payers come back and go, no, Jonathan, there's no way you're going to get $1,000. Actually, I'm going to offer you $450. That's real. And so all of a sudden, you as a CEO are saying, wow, I thought 3 and 4 years ago I would get $1,000 for that drug, but there may be because there's 3 or 4 other competitors out there. And what is that doing? That's collapsing the overall market in AMD. And I thought I was highly differentiated, but maybe that product isn't as differentiated as I thought it was. And so you've got payers coming at you. You've got government payer. You've got Medicaid, Medicare. You've got all these things going on just in the U.S. space, where ostensibly the pharma industry makes an inordinate, almost all of its profit, large portions of its profit are made here in the United States because we can charge a lot more money for the product here in the United States. That model is getting disintermediated.
Wow.
Yeah, that's huge.
So the playbook is getting torn up or just severely challenged?
Severely challenged.
In
some cases, clearly, you know, given the onset of generics, I mean, we know every drug will go generic after, depending on any number of variables, after 8 to 12 years, right? So we know that. So think about the fact that once you launch that drug, you've only got a finite amount of time to really make your money back. And what happens after you've got X number of years to make your money back, and all of a sudden you thought you could predict how much you're going to grow market share, how much you're going to... It's cut in half.
Yeah.
Right.
Ouch.
You may not even invested in the first place had you known that it was going to be $450 rather than $1,000.
Yeah,
right?
So think about what that does to your share price.
So that sounds very stressful as a leader.
Exactly.
Right now in pharma. I am, you know, this white paper, I love this white paper. Because it to me, it speaks to some of the distinctions between being a leader right now in pharma and being a leader in like really any other industry that we operate in, where we do a lot of team effectiveness work at AIIR. And when we do team effectiveness work, we're usually working with an intact team, and we work on helping them, you know, power up their team culture and elevate their team productivity. And we believe that great team culture, things like psychological safety, cohesion, trust, and things like, you know, being able to good dialogue and conversation about real things, that really matters a lot. And then on the team productivity side, being aligned and communicating effectively, executing and learning from, you know, your failures. and developing a learning mindset as a team. These are the sort of elements that help a team become high performing. But when we usually do this work, it's with an intact team, right?
Yeah.
It's a team that's they're rowing together, right, towards a common vision. And sometimes they play with other teams and, there's other influences, but largely they're staying as a pack. And what really struck me in this white paper is just how important it is to develop. I mean, you got to have those skills that I just shared, but there's this cross-functional teaming skills
Absolutely.
that seem to be really important.
And I think there's an important aspect of this in the story implied in the white paper that I wanted just to underscore, that product development in pharma is inherently cross-functional. So before we get that drug into your body and into the pharmacy for you to purchase, what's happening is that all of these various functions are sitting at the table, and the table is usually global.
So is that we're talking about commercial, R&D?
Well, it's commercial, it's regulatory. So the regulatory team is figuring out what's the file look like and what's the label story to the FDA. That's critical. So it's regulatory, it's clinical, the folks running the study. It's usually a biostatistician. It also includes then from that manufacturing, how are we going to manufacture it, where are we going to manufacture it, what's the cost of goods, all of this other stuff. And then you get into someone who's going to own the product launch strategy. So you get somebody all the way to the end that's commercial, with somebody involved that's usually an MD scientist. And in there as well, somebody that we call Med Affairs. And that Med Affairs person is often an MD or a PharmD saying, how do we prepare and educate the market? We call it KOL engagement, key opinion leader engagement, that's going to prepare the market that this new drug for wet AMD, we're going to get you excited about that. There's going to be a paper, or there's going to be stuff that comes that prepares the market for this new drug in the area of wet AMD. So to do all of that, you need a cross-functional team that is essentially shepherding and curating that asset as it goes from phase 1 to phase 2. And remember, in each phase, we're coming back at the end of that phase and we're looking at the data and we're presenting the data and the stats and doing the stats analysis and going to a higher body in the organization, usually executive team, to go yes, no. And obviously at phase 1, if we don't get a meaningful statistical effect, then we know what happened, right? It's game over, usually, unless there's maybe a belief that let's go back one more time and try it. But usually it's a binary event. It's binary at each of the stages. The binary in that I mean that at phase 2, we did not get the statistical effect. We've already sunk $200 or $300 million in it.
That's it.
It's it, right?
Yeah, let's move
so
on.
You've got this development team that's working on, it's a lot of trading of information, debating, presenting information, updates to an executive team. As the information from the interim analysis begins to move, then we start to say, well, we move from early stage manufacturing. Now, where and how do we manufacture it? Are we going to outsource it, or are we going to manufacture it ourselves? We do a lot of analysis as a team together. So what's required of you in this cross-functional team is to be interested in manufacturing, even though you may be not at all aware of that as your subject matter expertise. So then you're thinking about this thing that you're developing, and you have to have both an intellectual interest and vested interest in shepherding that thing through all the way to launch. Wow. Knowing somewhere along the line that may not happen because we might not get the data that we would like somewhere along the line.
Right.
Well, what I love what you both did in this white paper, and I know, Megan, you, I mean, from your experiential work as a coach and going into pharmaceutical companies, but also through some really great interviews with pharma leaders, we really broke down and codified, I think we were 6 different sort of distinct features that a cross-functional leader needs to be, or an enterprise leader, let's call it. In pharma. Maybe you could share just a little bit about that, those 6 areas.
Yeah, so in the paper, we really talk about these 6 key areas for leaders with cross-functional teams. So we've got clear decision-making frameworks, transcending functional silos, managing tension and ambiguity, aligning incentives and metrics, This one's my favorite
Yeah,
one.
it
We'll
is
talk about that
important.
one. 5, providing strategic direction. And 6, driving collective understanding. And so really thinking about what is the role of a leader on these cross-functional teams, because I think you said it, Ian, oftentimes there's that functional expertise, but how did they have an invested interest in really knowing and being a part of these cross-functional teams and thinking about how they make decisions and how they support one another? And one thing I see is that they tend to have this allegiance. Well, I'm on this functional team. This is what I care about. This is what I'm rewarded on. Why am I even on this cross-functional team? And so there's such a need for the leader around, again, providing strategic direction, clear decision-making frameworks, managing that tension and ambiguity, because it's real, because they are on their functional team, but they're there as a part of that cross-functional expertise to work together. And so I really think, and we talk about this in the white paper, that idea around aligning incentives and metrics. How are people rewarded, and is that tied to the behavior that you're looking for in your leaders? And so I think these 6 key behaviors are so critical for leaders, not just, oh, that would be nice, or, oh, maybe I should think about that. But no, these are imperatives and things that they need to be doing in order to really see the results that they're looking for. I interview leaders on these teams, and sometimes they're like, I don't know why we meet. We're meeting all the time. I'm in meetings all day long. I don't know why. I don't know what we're looking to accomplish. These people are brilliant. You're paying them a lot of money. They need to know why they're in the room, why they have a seat at the table, how they need to make an impact. And that's a huge missed opportunity if there's not strong leadership that's aligning the team and really thinking about, this is what we talk about in team effectiveness. What's their purpose? What's their reason for being? Who are their stakeholders? What are they looking to accomplish? What are their key metrics? How do they need to work together effectively? All of these things are so critical to really achieve results in these, we've talked about, very high stakes environments.
What can they only do as a team that they could not do otherwise as independent contributors? That's the struggle. Like, what, not only what is the purpose, but what can they only do together? And it's about a couple things. It's about this, I think of it in the sense of when you come together and you're making the best recipe in a kitchen, you're putting pieces together that require ingredients that can only make this phenomenal outcome product. And it's in that mixing of those ingredients that work is the mixing and knowing it's both art and science of doing that effectively. That is the outcome. And the work that is essential is creative tension, push back, creative yes, no, having the tolerance to be in that creative tension, to focus on the bigger picture. And that bigger picture is, do we fundamentally still believe in this asset? Do we fundamentally believe that we're going to get the data that we want to get with the label that we want to get? And do we still fundamentally believe from the commercial and financial analysis that the NPV, the net present value of this product, is going to be still strong? That's all. You're balancing all of these things. And as the product moves forward, there's no question it tips towards commercial expertise. But there's still a clinical piece to that, because we can have additional work done on once as we know. There's Keytruda from Merck has multiple indications. I think 27, if I'm wrong. You can Humira is the same thing. We can take that and get multiple indications, which is additional ongoing work, and that's how we get real value from that asset. Like Humira is a great story of where we get so much value out of that asset. And I think that's where the work of the team evolves over time. So these teams change in composition as the asset moves. The emphasis changes from clinical risk and assessment of clinical risk to really preparing ourselves for a very, very successful commercial launch.
So never worked in a pharmaceutical organization, but have worked in both intact teams and cross-functional teams, have led and lead intact teams and cross-functional teams. And I've got to say, some of the worst meetings that I've ever been part of or led have been the cross-functional meetings. Some of the best as well, by the way.
Yeah.
some of the most creative ideas and flow states have come by bringing together people outside of their functional silos and bringing them together. And I mean, some brilliant ideas, but also some of the worst meetings I've ever had. So I'm just curious, like, what makes a great, cross-function?
That's a good question.
Not necessarily what makes a great cross-functional meeting, but what does a leader do? What is a leader doing to make that meeting count and to really create? Let's think of it as like we use this metaphor like an orchestrator.
It's an orchestrator,
right?
yeah.
You're orchestrating different instruments in the band, R&D, clinical, commercial.
Yeah.
What does a great leader do to make that an excellent piece versus it a cacophony or just a flat kind of, piece?
Good question.
Pharma or outside of pharma?
Yeah. I think there's so many things. I think it's about that alignment. What's their purpose? Exactly what Ian said. What can they do together that couldn't happen any other way? I think helping people be bought in. What's in it for them? Why are they there? Why are they caring about this? Why are they an active participant in seeking to make this team and what their focus is better? Because I agree, when you can really bring together everybody's individual strengths and areas of expertise, you can achieve something far greater than the sum of its parts. But if I think about some of the cross-functional teams we've been on, it's like, if I'm ever sitting here, Ruben, I'm like, why am I here? Like, what's my purpose?
It's the worst feeling.
I feel like I might be wasting my time. And I think as the leader, it's incredibly important that they're setting the tone, what the purpose is, why is each person there, why are they critical to be there, what are the expectations for what they're looking for this team to accomplish, for the individuals to accomplish. But it takes time to do that work and to really think about.
But what if I said, but I shared an agenda, right?
And that's
then maybe that's not enough.
It's not enough. And somebody, Keith Reisinger, who is the executive director at Eli Lilly, said it's not about what you communicate, although that might have been a beautiful written agenda email. It's about the narrative or what gets repeated. And it's not just about, and I think, communication is a skill that so many of our leaders work on. It tends to be up at the top of the list. But here for pharma, we saw it was influence.
Influence being the number one skill.
One for pharma. And I think that's critical because it's not just what you say, it's what people hear and it's what gets repeated, it's what gets shared. And so that requires so much more intentionality and thoughtfulness. And as a leader, being realistic, like, hey, we're up against some challenges here, or hey, here's the state of things, but also inspire. Here's what we're looking to achieve and why you're a part of this. Like, how do you really understand what's motivating the team and how you can get people aligned? So there's such an opportunity, but I think sometimes we think it should be easier. Like, I sent the agenda email. Like, or like, you're in the room. Shouldn't you know why you're here?
Right.
Like,
so making these assumptions that people are just going to get it and understand expectations and understand the why, right? Just that of course you get it. Like, we're all here and passionate about this work. Of course you understand the why, but maybe not. Like, maybe we need to be much more explicit
about that
in the framing of why we're here.
Yeah, because I think leaders are overwhelmed. And so it does take that time to be self-reflective, to be more self-aware in order to plan effectively. Leaders need that time blocked out to think strategically. And I think we're moving so fast from thing to thing and from cross-functional meeting to meeting that sometimes we're getting crashed by the wave rather than kind of really riding on top of it.
Yeah. I do want to... I think that's excellent. Yeah, the notion of a dual citizen, so that's mentioned in this white paper, where your functional expertise might be clinical, R&D, or commercial, but if you're in this cross-functional team, now all of a sudden you have to maybe like understand a little bit of everything else, so much so that you become like a dual citizen to another function. Just curious, Ian.
It's a mindset, right? And that mindset is one of intellectual curiosity, right? And listening and understanding, how do the pieces of this puzzle fit together? There's two roles in these teams, as I see the purposes. One is information sharing, and two is decision making. And so what I've found in the superior leaders is they know and are able to reflect to the team, when do we need to be in information sharing mode? And there's good reason for that. I mean, sometimes we're reviewing like the entire stats plan, and the biostatistician is reviewing the stats plan, and we're talking about it. And there is a need for folks to understand, here's the statistical plan and the analysis plan. That's very detailed, but there's an important part, information sharing of folks knowing it. But then we come back to, what is the decision that we need to take collectively? We're not asking you all to make a decision about the stats plan, probably. That's a very specific. But there's a broader need to understand how that informs the what we call the movement across the toll gates. When we get to various important inflection points, we make decisions. We make a decision that said, do we feel that we go back and ask the executive committee, for example, that we need to power the study more and have more patients enrolled? And it's $150,000 per patient. Like that has budget impact.
Wow.
Right? And that's not unreasonable in an oncology study for being $150,000 per patient, right? Wow. For it to be in the study. That's there is the information, but there is also folks really understanding, when do we move into a decision-making mode?
Yes.
And how do we do that as a team effectively? What is the way that we debate that and consider that? And in knowing how we toggle between the state of information sharing and information. And not only information sharing, but decision making.
And what's the role of the leader in terms of setting the stage for,
exactly.
Hey, we're here for this. This is the mode that we're in now. This is the stage that we're in now, so that everyone's aligned to that. Because sometimes you come back into a meeting like, wait, why do I need to listen to this again?
Right.
So I think as a leader, how do you really shepherd and set the tone is critical.
You know, one of the things, just as an important point that folks have found in pharma around success or failure of products early stage, is when key information has been ignored. And there's a lot of the information that that isn't fully vetted and debated. And what happens, and we know this in other industries about executive decision making, is one gets blinded and gets enamored with it's what we know, Jonathan, from a psychological perspective.
Behavioral economics.
Right, and behavioral economics and the sunken cost
theory. You want your thesis to win.
And the sunken cost theory, right? Right? And we need, in that moment, that's where you can get blinders and say, I'm just going to throw more money at this. You know what? That's really not true. That statistical effect isn't true. And I'm going to double down. And the importance of these committees is the place where you can challenge that in a healthy way. And the precondition or prerequisite professionally is to allow and to have the humility and emotional intelligence to endure and participate in that for the sake of the company.
You know, and is there like formal norm setting, like in a team effectiveness? And I would argue just any team, they should have a mandate. A team charter, and on that charter, norms. Like, here's the behaviors that set us up for success. Here's the behaviors that undermine us for success. And it can be as silly as, like, you know, not everybody talk. You know, one person talks at a time. To you know, more complex, or, you know, use I statements. I'm just curious, like, in this context of like cross-functional teaming for such a critical pursuit of drug development, do we set norms, or is
absolutely.
It just,
you have to at two levels, just in terms of language and how we communicate, right? I statements, we statements. I think there are those that come from the functions and say, I'm commercial and I don't have an opinion about manufacture, so I'm not going to weigh in. So you have to create a language and a set of norms when there's an expectation that just because you don't know about manufacturing, that we want you to weigh in. And what you see is in teams where there isn't sufficient debate, the function leads, and then the function comes, snows everybody with information, overwhelms them with a 65-point PowerPoint deck with, you know, typeface of like 8
and then
font.
Your motivation, which was already low, is just like
okay, you know, this is functional leadership, and I'm snoozing through this. And that is actually That's not good effective use of a team, where you get what I call functional imperial leadership, and it happens in a certain way. The purpose of the team then gets lost.
Functional imperial leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because right now we're talking about how to manufacture it, and I can come in and show you the strategy, and we're going to get this and this, and then everybody goes, this is too much. Someone, this gets back to leadership, needs to frame that content, that information, and bring that back up to purpose. And why are we talking about this? And has to have the skill set to put that in a broader perspective. When that doesn't happen, people check out, and it isn't value add. People begin to say, I'm just showing up to meetings and I don't want to go anymore because you know what, it's just becomes function. It's a waste of my time, and it's functions talking their language.
Well, I know we're getting close to time for this, but leadership is actualizing a clear and compelling vision through others, and clearly what we're expressing here is that in pharma specifically, as a function of drug development needing to cross through so many different, and it sounds like that complexity just increases as we outsource, as you were sharing earlier, different functions and parties and constituencies, that it's not enough to just be excellent at what you do. You also have to be excellent at collaborating with other functions and being a cross-functional leader in order to really be successful in actualizing that clear and compelling vision. I want to just ask Ian, Megan, any parting insights or thoughts? It could be pertaining specifically to our pharma leader and pharma organization, but also more broadly on this great topic of leadership. Anything that comes to mind? We covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing for me in terms of working on this white paper is that everything in here is so relevant regardless of your industry. And so just kind of, it's been interesting. We're talking now at AIIR a lot about AI and kind of related, it's almost like what's really human about the work we do, and thinking about leadership too, again, regardless of your industry. There's so much about your context and your environment, but there's so many things that are core to what does it mean to lead well cross-functionally. And so it definitely encourage, regardless of your industry, I think there's some fantastic points in here that I think are very relevant, regardless of the industry that you serve in.
Great call. So if I'm in retail, like this is still...
It's still relevant.
Still
highly relevant. So I've been talking about some of the insights here with clients in other industries, and it's really relevant.
Nice. Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, the final question that comes to mind is I was just reflecting on what we talked about. It comes back to the leader, the person, the formidable task of leading a cross-functional team. And in some of these cases, these leaders shift. It can be a role that's shared, but usually it's someone that's shepherding that through. And there's a couple of, I think, preconditions that we allude to in that. One is your enterprise mindset. How do you step back from where you've been functionally to thinking about that asset, whatever you're developing, as your reason to be, right? And that is your North Star, is that asset. And that you are there engaged in leading a team to engage in risk mitigation in service of the company and what is an exceptional amount of resources that are being spent on that. You are there to facilitate the best outcome for that asset. And to get the decisions taken and information shared. That's a tall order. Do you understand your role and the magnitude therein? Yeah. That's what this paper speaks to, is being able to leverage all of those resources around you to do that.
Wow. Ian, I love this concept of enterprise leader, enterprise mindset, which is different than functional mindset and having a narrow range of expertise. So really, really valuable. Thank you. And I agree that, Megan, I think that point, even though it's highly salient within pharma due to everything you shared about how the sausage is made,
Right.
And how that industry exists, and yet these are timeless and highly applicable in other industries as well. So fantastic. Thank you both so much for joining on this podcast about leadership. And we look forward to our next podcast. And until then, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.